Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Holonet Hot Takes. I'm your host, Tom Larson, here with.
Ben Corey,
How are you doing to Ben?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Doing good. We haven't seen each other in a minute here on
I
this
know.
Zoom.
We
How
we've officially parted ways. We're in different parts of the world now, so it's all good across the country. Um, and yeah, we've
but hey, thank God
been
for Zoom, am I right?
thank God for Zoom. Yeah,
Somehow still using it. And for those worried, I'm not in any Star Wars gear. I am wearing the Star Wars shirt.
good.
Um, just nothing behind me because I'm in a library now. So this may be the setting for the next couple weeks episodes. If I can get my room together, we'll see what posters I can get out. But this will have to make do for now.
Yeah, same here.
So
Same here.
what are we talking about today?
Today is our Acolyte special, Thomas. It's been coming.
It's been brewing.
I think it was kind of a good thing that we let things brew for a minute, to be honest.
Yeah, let it kind of run its course. Let everyone really let it simmer, marinate, all of the above.
The last I checked, the petition is their next milestone. They just passed 70,000 signatures and they're about to get to 75 for wanting to watch The Acolyte to renew it for
I
season two.
saw the that was it what was it a change.com.
Yes, and we love a good old petition for season two.
No way. I
Yeah.
did see that. I didn't know if it actually caught any yeah, wow. 71,000 signatures are on they're on their way to 75,000.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Started
Um,
by Blue Smith, whoever that is. Good for you, Blue Smith.
I think it's amazing because then like three or four petitions came out of the woodwork, right? One was to keep it canceled, which stayed competitive for a while. That was pretty funny.
Can't keep the acolyte canceled. That's
Yeah.
hilarious.
It started like a couple days later and was like on the same trajectory, which was hilarious, I think, in my opinion. Um, yeah. Before we go too far into this, in terms of our thoughts and opinions and feelings, I
Mhm.
think there was a good I think it was Screen Rant that did an article soon after the Acolyte finished its run in July about like is the Acolyte that bad kind of thing of like, you know, and it separated it into two categories. We had the Rotten Tomatoes score and we had the Nielsen ratings, which is the ratings pretty much how many people are actually watching the show on streaming services,
Mhm.
which I think is a more comprehensive number in terms of like, especially in terms of cancellation, in terms of Disney Plus, of like those Nielsen ratings and those viewership metrics are way more important for a conversation around season two than Rotten Tomatoes and reviews and critics
Yeah,
scores, right?
which makes
Because
sense.
yeah, viewership equals, people who are subscribed to your channel who are watching it, which means money, right?
Yeah.
People who are you know, that's what it is essentially, right? Whereas reviews are, people judging your piece of art. Um, and I think so. I have some numbers for you from a podcast. It's called The Town. Um, it's a podcast by Puck. You can find it where podcasts are found. Um, and they had a guest. His name is Jimmy Doyle. He's the head of business development at Luminate, which, if you don't know, is kind of like an IMDb Pro version of like this industry database provided by Variety. So it's a bunch of contacts. It's kind of like it's more of like a business to business model, but they provide a lot of interesting statistics sometimes. And so this guy, Jimmy Doyle, went on this entertainment industry podcast talking about Lucasfilm's success on Disney Plus slash was it successful was the main question. And I think it was really interesting because he brought forth a lot of strong numbers of why The Acolyte was the worst show on Disney Plus Lucasfilm. kind of genre, right? It's the worst Star Wars show in terms of numbers,
Mhm.
which is interesting because
Even worse than Book of Boba Fett?
even worse than Book of Boba Fett.
That's
Um,
shocking.
yeah. So when it fits into the Nielsen scores, like it opens, right? It opens to a decent number, right? It's still the biggest Disney Plus opening of the year in terms of viewership, right? So it did 2.9 million views on its like opening two-part weekend, right?
Mhm.
Which, 2.9 million people watched the show, which is fairly decent for a television show, right?
And you got to consider 2.9 million, probably more like households, because that number, or do they adjust for that number?
I don't know the
Um,
direct statistic. This is like Nielsen viewership hours, you know?
because I'm always thinking it's streaming, I've at least
Yeah.
watched stuff with like five or six people in the room. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Well,
kind of
Nielsen
hearing that,
does kind of, they have the ways of aggregating those data in a
gotcha.
comprehensive way so that it normally brings it in.
That makes
But
sense.
you're right, there is a flaw to the number, the system. It's not going to be perfect, right? It's not 100% accurate. These are
Mhm.
all kind of estimates. They're
And that's
really
not to downplay
accurate.
it. That's to
Yeah.
more like
hmm
it's probably the
They're
number's bigger,
they're yeah, could be.
I'd say.
But really accurate. It's a really accurate measure.
Mhm.
In the way that they're doing it. Just so we know, the next biggest Disney Plus TV show that premiered in 2024, including Percy Jackson, which was December of last year, but including Percy Jackson, was Echo, which debuted to 1.17 million views
Holy cow.
in the same year. So the Acolyte nearly doubled it. So
Yeah,
in terms of
nearly.
like relative success, the Acolyte still is, the biggest Disney Plus show to premiere this year.
Wow.
But again,
So where does it rank all time? Do you know? Did they talk about that at all?
it ranks like nowhere all time. And so this is the next point that I'm about to present to you
Mhm.
is while 2.9 million views is like a half decent number, given their marketing campaign and all of these things, Obi-Wan opened to 7.5 million views.
See that makes more sense to me. That's
Yeah.
that's right.
hmm Um, And again, Obi-Wan and The Acolyte are kind of the tale of two very similar shows in terms of numbers, except Obi-Wan opens with 7.5 million views, and The Acolyte opens with 2.9 million views, so it's a lot slower bottom, right?
Yeah.
So comparing the two, Obi-Wan has then follows a 37% drop in viewership, right? So nearly a third, nearly, almost half, but not really. 37% of people don't tune in for the next week of Obi-Wan, right?
hmm
And the Acolyte, again, 2.2% don't tune in for the next week of the Acolyte. Now, or 22.4%. So almost 20, no, almost a quarter of the people don't tune in for week three of, or week two of the Acolyte. Sorry, I'm saying a bunch of numbers. In short, Obi-Wan drops almost 40% from week two to week three. Acolyte drops 22.5% from week two to week three. And then Acolyte drops another 9% from week three to week four. So from week two
Jeez.
to week four, they lose the same amount that Obi-Wan lost, right? But again, 30% of 2.9 is a lot small. Like your viewership is shrunken a lot more, and you have a lot less viewers than Obi-Wan does from
Then
30%
30% of
of 7.5.
yeah, that's wild to really look at those numbers. And because I
hmm
remember there were some fans that were really not happy with Obi-Wan, but I remember the hype around it. And I felt like there was a similar hype around the Acolyte. So I'm interested in kind of the thought of the opening was just not like 5 million people less were interested.
Yeah.
Kind of a generalization, but like let's just say there's 5 million people who did not want or care to tune into the Acolyte like they cared to tune into Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
Um,
And, if you're analyzing again in business, creative strategy methods is like you have a wholly new idea in a new era versus you have Ewan McGregor coming back as Obi-Wan and Darth Vader's in it. And so you're going to reach a wider demographic of people, right? So you
Hmm.
have generations of people are going to come in to watch that show versus, maybe more casual Star Wars fans are not as interested in something deep diving the lore of, um, you know,
Of
the
like
High
the act.
Republic. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes sense too, taking that into consideration. Because it's like none of my older family members who like actually were around when Star Wars released back in
Hmm.
77, none of them tuned into Acolyte.
Yeah.
Well, I know some of them that actually did tune into Obi-Wan because they were
Yeah.
like, that's a character I
It's,
know. That's a
yeah.
character I
Darth Vader's in it.
Darth
Like,
Vader's in it. I might as well watch it.
hmm
And this one just had they had no interest in it. And then as the weeks came on and it started getting really, kind of politicized and polarizing, uh,
hmm
they lost every single interest they ever had. Any
Yeah.
percent of interest they had in it, it was
Yeah,
gone within a
because
couple weeks.
it became something that was not worth watching because the risk, the reward, the payoff of actually viewing it, of spending your time and sitting down and trying to figure out this show, you already knew from word of mouth that it wasn't that great.
And I will
Or there was
say, I am glad I watched it, Uh,
hmm
and not just because of this podcast and I'm able to talk and hear and like, because I genuinely am a fan, but I mean, there's some content I'm still catching up on. Like,
hmm
it's just how life is. But this, I was there for the release and stuff, and I was hyped for it. And I'm glad I stuck it out because in the end, they did do a lot of things that I thought were great in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
literally remember I was rewatching some of our clips and I talked about the bleeding of the crystal and how cool
Yeah.
that would be. And then literally
hmm
2 weeks later, the last episode, they bleed the crystal.
Dude.
And we never got back to talking about that. So like, I don't want this conversation to be completely downbeat because I mean, obviously subject matter, that's how it's going to be. I do want to say that there are stuff from that show that I do appreciate that I never got to really say. And it's not looking like we'll have a chance to say that stuff again just because it's not it's not looking good. I know there's the petition, but my thought process is a petition really going to change the minds of Hollywood execs in the
Well,
age of today?
here's my issue with the petition is because it would be one thing if the petition's translated to like actual viewership, but it doesn't, you know? If like
Hmm.
those like 75,000 people who sign a petition, say bring season two back, I don't know what the guarantee is that everybody who signs that petition is going to watch season two,
Hmm.
you know? It's not a commitment at any like point really, right? Like you type your name in and email and you've signed the petition. Like those petitions don't translate to anything. What would be different is if all of a sudden the Acolyte viewership spiked, right? To like
Hmm.
extraordinary numbers, right? Because that's what happened with Andor, right? So
Hmm.
Andor is the complete reverse of that, of like, you know, very low viewership numbers at the beginning, lower than the Acolyte, debuts to like very quietly, like not that great. But from the week that it finished to week 26 of its release, Andor sees the 30% increase in viewership. The closest comparison to that in terms of Lucasfilm TV shows is The Mandalorian, which got 11%.
Holy cow. So it really, and I mean, I
So,
know why, and I've talked about
yeah,
why. We've
because it's a
talked about
great
that on this
show.
podcast. It's a fantastic
Because
show.
it's a great show.
It hooks you in.
Not to
And
mention the awards that it got nominated for, being nominated for, real categories and Emmys and stuff like that. Like, that's evidence that it's not just a fluke. It shows that that show has real potential, and season two is going to perform well because while it quietly opened, it got bigger and bigger and bigger through word of mouth, and people actually started to believe in the show, and the fandom actually got behind it. if, instead of people going on Twitter and complaining about the Acolyte or saying that they want season two and saying that they need season two, if everybody pledges to, keep, if they all just started watching the Acolyte on Disney Plus, like on repeat nonstop and started to climb those viewership up to, numbers that Andor did or something, then you have a concrete cause for renewing the show,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But signing a petition and complaining on Twitter doesn't give anybody a cause for coming back and watching a show or creating another and spending the money and taking the risk on a show that already kind of flopped, created a lot of controversy, and created a headache for a lot of people, right?
No, and you're exactly right with that. At the end of the day, it's a numbers game. We
Hmm.
know that. We've talked about it. That was one of my first points on the first episode of this when we originally started talking about the Acolyte. It's back to the numbers. And when you spend $180 million on a show that's 20 to 30 minutes per episodes for 8 episodes, you're not producing a lot of content. You're way overspending. And your return was what? You took out the
I'll,
shop online. People can't,
I'll challenge you on the spending because I don't know. At this point in my philosophy, I don't really care about overspending as much. I mean, I do in the greater scheme of like, you know, Star Wars needs to have the economics work, and so if they spend a lot of money, they need to like show that in results. So I
Mhm.
understand that point of view, but I don't care if a show spends a cajillion dollars to make a TV show that's 30 minutes. But, that's a different conversation if the show's good, Like
Mhm.
Has a relatively similar budget in terms of like, it's a high budget, quote unquote, high budget film ca or TV show in that category, but it's really well made, so I don't really care as much?
Yeah, and I guess that's what you do with that money, right?
Hmm.
Uh, but that's another thing that shocked me is they completely took every. Remember how the website went down?
Yeah.
Like you couldn't find any Acolyte merchandise. I never really checked back to see if that got up or not, just because I really didn't. It didn't really affect me at all. I just thought it was interesting that that was the play Disney was making. But they
Which is
put
fascinating.
but they put so much time and energy into it. I mean, their whole Comic-Con booth, you remember, was the
Hmm.
Acolyte. It was
Yeah.
entirely Acolyte themed. All the props from the Acolyte were there. I made a TikTok about it if you guys didn't see it. Um, but it's yeah, it's all the merchandise is there. It was
Yeah.
the only thing they talked about. And then I mean they had what's it
They
called?
do.
D23. And so they talked and then they had the Manny Jacinto. He talked at D23.
Yeah, and yeah, they had him. We both thought that that's what they were going to
That was
announce
the
at
announcement.
D23. We thought that he was going to say we're coming back for season two. Everyone was riding this great high of the finale. They're like, "Oh my gosh, they set up some exciting things for season two. Maybe we can write off season one as kind of like a setup for season two." And like we got all excited about it and then like literally right after D23, they're like, no, we're pulling the plug on it. I really feel bad for Manny because like that's gotta be like a really cruel move. Like I bet you he didn't know going into that conversation about reflecting on the Acolyte. I'm sure he thought just as we did of like, okay, maybe they're gonna announce while I'm here and get my
Yeah.
reaction and be like, this is gonna be fun. I saw him, he was at another con recently, like a couple days ago, where he was talking about, he's like, they asked him, like, what's the one thing that you want to do in his career? He's like, the Accolade season two. Like, I feel like there's probably like some vengeance of like, I want to do this?
And I
Like,
mean, for him especially, because I really liked his character. I thought the Stranger was pretty
yeah,
fun and had a lot of potential. Lots of
yeah,
potential. And with a character, and when you play a character like that, I could only think to you probably only think to yourself, like, holy shit. Or sorry, holy cow, like what can I do with this? How can I act this? How can I really take this role to the next level? So it's yeah, I totally get where his kind of disappointment and that yeah, drive for vengeance as you say comes from because it's like I would too if I was a Sith and I just spent couple years of my life wielding lightsabers and developing this character, and then you kind of know because I'm sure they know where the character is going to go. You talk about the multi-season development of characters way early on,
Mm-hmm.
so he
Yeah.
knows mentally where this guy is supposed to go, where this the vision of the
You have,
show is, and
hmm
now it's gone.
and I just like, I don't know. You set up Darth Plagueis, who everybody was asking for already, right? Who we thought that show was going to be about. And now all of a sudden you kind of use it as a tease for season two and then don't have season two. I put out a thing on Twitter on one of our accounts, I think. I was saying like this could all just be a sham to get rid of like Leslie Headland. Like this could all just be a sham. Like maybe they'll like make another TV show, call it something different, give it a silly other name, like I don't know, The Master, get a new creator in there and bring it like I feel like that might be like something that's happening behind the scenes. I don't know because it really does seem like they set up all this world stuff at the end. Everyone kind of, they did what a great TV show does is end on a high, right, of a finale. Like everyone who stayed stuck it through or came back and watched it was like, oh, wow, they completed the show, which was my theory from the beginning of like they should have just dropped it all in one go because the show is a mystery show, which doesn't translate well in Star Wars. So it's going to make no sense, and people are going to be upset about it because the logic is never going to be make complete sense because it's a mystery. And if the logic made complete sense, you'd figure it out from episode one,
Mhm.
right? So if you dropped it all in one go, people would, give you more credit. I don't know. It just seems so weird and so evident of the discombobulation that's happening there in terms of development, story execution, like not thinking everything through. Um, like getting something intriguing, getting a fun project that's new and different and could be kind of exciting and rushing into it and then not really knowing what to do because and you're not able to spend your way out of it because you already spent so much up front. So you're kind of pigeonholed into trying to make the show work. And I don't know like what the thinking is because to me, they filmed this show like before COVID, right? Like they've had
Mhm.
this show existing for so long. Like this has been such a long and arduous project, right? Like we've
Mhm.
known about this show for so long. They've been filming it for so long. Like I really feel for all of like the people on this show to like go through this painstaking process and for it to be so like torn to shreds by people on the internet who are saying like all these crazy things about it. Like, it's like I can't imagine what it's like. But at the same time, it's like you had years, right? You had years and years and years. And, you know, I don't know, to like think this through. And then like I don't know, maybe you could engineer the marketing differently. Maybe you could do it so that like you could try to get people to stick with the show more. Maybe you could talk about distribution strategy with Disney Plus more and say, "Hey, this show is not going to work if we don't drop it all in one go." And maybe that was a big no-no. I don't know, but what happened doesn't like it didn't work, right?
Yeah.
And the answer that we are going to get is Ahsoka season two and Mandalorian and Grogu movie. Like, I don't know. It just seems like there's not much to be excited about.
No, and it's I think it also goes back as you mentioned. It's kind of this double-edged sword of like, yeah, you had so much time, you had this, you had years to plan, years to execute, and yet you still executed, and let's be honest, a lackluster story at times that had continuity issues with the rest of the timeline. It had just simple things here and there that like I'm not saying all of the hate and all of the online,
Yeah,
nonsense and toxicity was like worth
it's
it,
completely toxic. But
but
man,
to a degree, it's like, yes, we should be telling shows when they do something wrong. We're the audience. That's what we're able to,
yeah,
that's our
you
responsibility. That's
should.
what we're called to do. But not as
Yeah,
not in as a toxic
be a
manner.
responsible critic, you know? Like don't don't say stuff that's just blatantly untrue or completely biased or things like that. Like back up your reasoning, you know?
Hmm.
Like if you don't like the show, it should be because the story isn't working or something blipped for you or you hated that they retconned Ki-Adi-Mundi into like having a longer lifespan even though he should have been dead. Like all of those things make sense, you know?
And I think those are things we have talked about on this podcast
Hmm.
in very respectful manner to the show,
Yeah.
because it's
Hmm.
never been, and that's kind of that what we hope to kind of help bring to the Star Wars community is that kind of unbiased, just opinions straight from here's our reasonings, here's the facts
Yeah.
behind our reasonings.
Hmm.
It's not because of this all this other
Yeah.
stuff, you know. And it's kind of sad. It's I've seen a lot being in the Star Wars realm online and in media, you know. And I like to have fun. I poke meme. I make all of the memes on our account essentially, and I like to poke fun at stuff and here and there, and you know, it's fun. It's a community.
Hmm.
Um, you know, we can make fun of each other, but when it gets to the point of hate and stuff, and I've seen a lot of different people on the internet causing controversy because of Star Wars stuff. It's like, guys, like at the end of the day, we're all fans of the same franchise, and to do a disservice to each other. If we want a better show, let's talk about how to, you know, help support a better show or what went wrong. Or let's not just attack each other and come at, you know, actors, actresses, creatives, and this and that just for personal reasons, you know?
Yeah. For things that you shouldn't be upset about.
Yeah,
Um, I completely agree with that. I think my next big question, and you put something out about this, which is interesting, is that where's Dave Filoni in all of this?
I did.
Um,
And I thought so I saw that article just doing my, you know, daily research
yeah,
and whatnot, just kind of scrolling. And I came across that and I was like, this is a great question that I don't think people have talked about in recent times is because I remember when they announced that Dave Filoni was going to get promoted and stuff
yeah,
and become the chief creative officer. And
yeah.
everyone was like, we're saved. Star Wars is back,
Mm-hmm.
this and that. And that was a couple years ago, right? If I'm
Yeah,
not mistaken.
yeah.
Um, and I don't think the state of Star Wars has changed that much in those couple years. And I know it takes time to make this kind of content, to make this stuff.
But
It just doesn't seem, and like even with his own shows, though.
so here's my question to you.
Yeah.
Because every piece of like shows that he's been directly involved with, I think objectively have been a win for Star Wars, right?
Mhm.
Clone Wars
Objectively.
clearly, Rebels clearly, Mandalorian clearly, Book of Boba Fett, maybe not, maybe. I think I think he was less focused on Book of Boba Fett than maybe he should have been, from what I
Hmm.
kind of understand is that some other people were more like in control. I think, you know, the Bad Batch clearly, the Tales of the Jedi, Tales of the Separatists. But I just don't like, here's my question to you, and I'll answer it first, is do we think that Dave Filoni is actually a chief creative officer? Do you think that name was just like a title to hype everyone up? Because I don't know if he's actually being the chief creative officer. I think he's busy, deservedly so, like rightfully so, of being a director, writer director on a Star Wars movie, right?
Hmm.
So like I don't know like if he was like in my opinion, my dream chief creative officer at Star Wars is putting out a weekly newsletter of like what's happening in Star Wars, responding to it, you know, answering questions, doing what kind of Leslie Headland had to do of like putting out debriefs after Acolyte episodes
Hmm.
to try to like defend herself and keep people watching the show and keep it engaged and everything. and like defending herself from all these toxic fans and everything. But like in my dream world, like the Lucasfilm, the Star Wars chief creative officer is in charge of shaping every aspect of the Star Wars story. And it's something that we know that he can do. I just don't know if that's the role that he's currently in. You know what I mean? Like it's something that he clearly can do because he did it with um the Clone Wars, right? He did so many different creative things that shifted and both adhered to and advanced George Lucas's like original premises. And he did all of these things and he took risks, right? I think a lot of the memes of like people hating on Ahsoka when she first came and now we loved her and comparing that to the Acolyte, there's an essence of truth there, but there's also not because, you know, Ahsoka's a vastly different arc than what the Acolyte was. Um, it's also animation, which had a different reaction back then. But for me, I personally don't see Dave, you know, and anybody at Lucasfilm for that matter, standing up and answering the questions, right? Of like, they announce, and technically Lucasfilm has never announced this, but we've kind of accepted it as word gospel now of like, the Acolyte season 2 is getting canceled. Like, technically, there's never been an announcement, there's never been this, there's never been that. But there's never been a denial, so we all accept it, right? And I think what's interesting to me is that there's no one at Lucasfilm who's putting out statements or, doing interviews and saying, no, we made this decision because of this, you know? Like, for me personally, I think a lot of Star Wars fans, and, maybe this is just me, but like, I would react very well, and we might not even have this podcast if there was someone at Lucasfilm who, like, when the Acolyte got canceled, did an interview and explained thoroughly why it got canceled, right? Of like, if somebody wrote down and said, "We regretfully have to cancel the Acolyte, despite the loads of fans who love it, because it just didn't perform the way we wanted to." I think you'd have a way better reception than a bunch of people yelling and running around and scrimmaging around on Twitter. Maybe that's just me, but I think they kind of need to take control a bit of the narrative, which I know
I'd,
is
I,
crazy.
I'd agree. And in regards to Dave Filoni, it is weird because I feel like the only interaction with the fans and like on a more personal note, explaining why they're doing what they're doing and this and that has only been in like the behind the scenes content of each show, which, is another way Disney's making content is just by recording all behind the scenes stuff, getting little round tables going. And that's as much as we've seen of like a
Well,
real interaction with the fans outside of like conventions and stuff or
so
interaction like
so
explaining.
this is also what makes me think this, right? Is that he rarely does like press outside of his own projects for Lucasfilm, right?
When you
So like
should be doing press for everything
yeah, so
if you're the
when you're
chief creative officer.
so when they're at D23, he's with John Favreau going and d doing their pitch for the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, but he's not hanging around and he's not doing the Manny interview and he's not, like there's blips and bobs of people asking him separate questions like what would you think of a rated R project? But those normally come from him doing press for his own projects, right?
And I think it kind of goes back to there was this rumor years ago, and I'm sure that it's still around there and circulating, but there's the Kathleen Kennedy side of Lucasfilm and there's the Dave Filoni side. There's the division in the actual company
Yeah.
itself. I haven't heard much on that rumor recently. I remember when I first
Yeah.
heard it and was like, that would make sense as to what's
Mhm.
going on because there was just it's the different voices telling um, different really distinct voices coming in
Yeah.
at different moments in Star Wars content. And it's just it is fascinating with that title And the reason I brought it up was really because, yeah, with that title, I haven't heard much from him outside of, like you said, Mandalorian and Grogu and stuff. But and this will be my hot take here on Holland Hot Takes, is that his new stuff's kind of boring. I did not, it was a struggle to get through Ahsoka for me. It's been a struggle to get through most of Bad Batch and stuff. Mandalorian season 3 was bad. Book of Boba Fett was horrible. It's not all of his stuff for me has been a win as a fan personally. So going
Mm-hmm.
into Mandalorian and Grogu, I'm not that excited. And what this Game Rant article does for me that kind of put into words I couldn't think of is, as we've mentioned, it goes back to the story of it and the storytelling aspect. And it's proven that he's a good storyteller. I mean, fantastic Clone Wars, Rebels, and he just doubled down on what he did in Clone Wars, even better. You know, it's like there's obviously signs of a really great storyteller, and he deserves all the
Yeah.
recognition he's gotten. Mandalorian season 1, fantastic. Season 2 was pretty great. I just think the pressures of what's gotten, or the pressures of the Star Wars community, or this or that, he has this article goes into is relied on heavily on fan service and
Yeah.
going away from straying away from story and just going as fan service. And so I think, yeah, I'm just not hopeful for the
And
next couple projects.
that was the Favreau quote, right? Where he said, "We want to reward the people who have been with the Mandalorian since the beginning and the people who have been with Star Wars since the beginning." And I don't know. That's not the thing that I personally want to hear going into a Star Wars movie. Is like
No, not at all.
that shouldn't be the primary objective.
And I mean, there's the old Hollywood adage, give me the
Hmm.
same but different, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
you can do that without fan service. I mean, get how did any of the other Star Wars get made? You know,
Yeah.
they didn't just, yeah, they technically did just reuse a bunch of the same characters and develop them. But, you know, Luke wasn't in episode 1, 2, and 3. It was
Well,
essentially a different character. It was Anakin, right? It was Anakin
yeah.
and Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan you saw for what, maybe a total of 30 minutes throughout 3 films. But it's like you can have connectivity and be connected with the greater thing scheme of things. But just to do fan service for fans' sake, like you're rewarding us, like, dude, you don't need to reward me at all. If anything, you already did that several times over during The Mandalorian
Yeah.
and Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka. Dude, I didn't think Ezra was coming back. Got to see him. I didn't think I'd see Thrawn live action. Got to see him. You know, Boba Fett, it's the freaking hand coming out of the sand thing directly ripped from Parks and
Yeah.
Rec
Yeah.
joke. Like you gave the fans the service. You gave them
Yeah.
the you
Well,
rewarded us.
I think Book of Boba Fett's the perfect example of like if your mission is fan service, it's not exactly going to pan out well, right?
No. And
Like that's the clear-cut example of like people have been begging since, they first saw Boba Fett in before the year of 2000, right? Since that parade that he first debuted in to know more about that character. And I just to then come up with this show of like, just I don't know. It doesn't like that was for the service of the fans to give them what they've been begging for since, the 80s is like it shows that like sometimes the people don't know what they want.
my biggest qualm with that whole fan service stuff is
Hmm.
if you mess it up, you ruin it.
Yeah.
And what they did in Book of Boba Fett, I've been waiting for this for years. Boba Fett versus Cad Bane. It
Yeah.
was originally scheduled for the animated series. There
Yeah.
was old graphics of it. I've
Hmm.
watched those
Yeah.
several times over. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. You get this fantastic duel between two of the most badass bounty hunters in the galaxy. One very young, starting his journey, one at the end of his journey.
Yeah.
Bam, young guy wins. coolest
Yeah.
stuff ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it was going to happen in live action. First off, Cad Bane looks epic in live action. They did a great job with his character.
Yeah.
So when I thought, man, the finale is coming, they teased him at the end of the last one. This is it. I'm getting my moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know how disappointed I was
Oh, I'm sure.
when I saw it take place in 30 seconds, wasn't even a cool gunfight, literally happened as a side plot. It it broke me. Not really, but it was heartbreaking to see.
Yeah. And
Anyways, that's why I'm scared for
Shrouded,
Mandalorian
yes.
and Grogu if it's just fan service because it disappoints me more than giving me something fresh that I can either like or dislike.
I I I know they can never say this in an interview, but I think the thing that would excite the most people would be for them to say, we're gonna clean up the timeline, and this is gonna like answer all of the first order questions in the way that, you know, other Star Wars things have done, you know.
Give that
I
to me.
think, yeah,
That's
if
all I
if
need
they said that, I think a lot of people would be so excited,
because
but
it's a different
politically they can't.
expectation, right? It's a different
Yeah.
expectation. It's not like I'm going to give you the thing you've been waiting for eternity. You saw how it played
Hmm.
out here. Let me replay it out
Hmm.
somewhere else.
Hmm.
Or you know about these characters.
Yeah.
It's a broad expectation. It's the
Yeah.
I need to know what the heck happened to get from point A to point B. Not I know this needs to happen or I know this character and this is what I want the character to do and it's a hyper specific very excited fandom thing. No, it's a broad question that needs to be answered. Would be awesome. Would be
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Well, all right. We will have more soon and shortly because that there's still more
So
to
much
talk about
so
in
much to
terms
talk
of
about.
Star Wars stuff, but it's yeah, we've been away for a while and it's not looking good.
It's not looking good. But to not end on a grim note, we will be back next week with some more Star Wars content for you. Keep your eye out for a new special guest. We may have a guest on in a couple weeks. I'm still scheduling behind the scenes, but they're pretty cool person. So hoping to have that on to give you guys an expectation. But that's all I'll say. That's a broad expectation. A guest. Woohoo.
Oh,
Anyways, any last words before we sign off?
thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for listening. If you don't already, please follow us on the socials. These episodes come out on YouTube every Monday, along with content following on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter in the following week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been HoloNet Hot Takes.